Hello and welcome to OPA GCSE Sociology. And today we're going to be looking at what is the relationship between education and capitalism. So over the last two lessons, we've looked at the functionalist perspective, the functionalist view of what the education system, what school's purpose is. Now we're going to be looking at the Marxist perspective. For the do now, there was a video. Obviously you can't see that. Because you're not in class. So I'm just going to go over the answers to some of these questions, just explain what the video is really talking about. It's talking about essentially the education system within the UK and how there is a massive sort of rich poor divide within that, depending on whether you go to state or private schooling. So when it refers to the apartheid education system, it's just talking about how there is this rich poor divide in the education system based on private or state schooling. How much percent of the UK's population go to private school? Well, it's roughly 7% of the UK. But within the House of Lords, so not the House of Commons, but the House of Lords, it's a sort of the next one up, 57% of Lords are privately educated. So it's making the point here, you'd probably see a similar statistic for those who are in the House of Commons, who are MPs, front benchers. You could see it even for CEO jobs. It's always overrepresented or over proportionate in terms of the people who are privately educated getting the top jobs. In theory, it should just be roughly around 7%. But you can see it's way overrepresented. Represented. How many prime ministers have been privately educated? So there's 20 prime ministers who have been privately educated. So again, that's a massive proportion. That's more than 7% of the prime ministers we've had. And shockingly, a lot of those are in recent times as well. So it's again thinking about whether they're necessarily relatable, representative of you, even though they are representing you politically. And then just going over a bit of the history of private schools. So in the 1300s, private schools were initially set up as charities for poor children. So they had good intentions at first. In fact, private schools, one of the big debates is whether they should have that status of a charity that they still do today. And generally it's believed that they do that in order to avoid paying large amounts of tax. How did private schools change in the 1800s? So they concentrated on middle class and upper class students, so students who were from wealthier backgrounds. Out of 500,000 privately educated students each year, how many are free? So how many are through bursaries or scholarships? There's about 6,000. So again, it's not a massive amount. It just shows you there that generally it's people who have money. And the next question kind of links into that. So what is the average fee of a year? What is the average fees a year for private schools and the average income a year in general? So at the time of this video, the average fees were 16,000 a year. Some places even higher than that, some as high as 50. The average UK income was at the time, it's a little bit more now, it's about 31, was 28,000 roughly. So you can see there, that's before tax. Most people would not be able to afford sending their kids to private schooling. It's just not feasible. So two benefits of private education, I'm going to give you a few. So class sizes are much smaller. So generally in comprehensive schools, so state schools, generally it's around 25, 30. In private schools, generally it's no more than 15, more like 5 to 10. The curriculums, there's more variety of the curriculum. So you can study things that like classics, or you might study things like economics, or you might study things like Latin that aren't necessarily offered in state schools frequently. Facilities are better, so it might have better grounds, better facilities in terms of maybe computers, It might be as well better facilities in terms of staff members and things like that. So they might be more qualified. Connections. So often you have speakers who are celebrities or famous people or who are working for the top companies who will come and do talks or do programs for the private schools, generally because it's sort of, there is a big network there with people, previous alumni from these private schools will know people who are in those industries and the top jobs, so it's the passing down, as if you like. Work experience as well, so because of those connections they're more likely to get the better opportunities in terms of work experience. And then what did Finland do to the education system? So they unified the education system. They ensured that everything was a level playing field in terms of no distinctions between state and private schools. And what they noticed was a drop in income inequalities and various other inequalities related to class because of that, the shared experience. Yeah. And they also, something that also is noted, they it culturally encouraged lots of people who still went to these private schools, or rather who were affluent, would be mixing with people perhaps from poorer backgrounds, not in all cases, in some cases. So it just made them a bit more understanding. And here's just some stats just to really illustrate how class can link into the education system, and that rich-poor divide. So a child from a disadvantaged background is 18 months behind when they take their GCSEs. And that's not just in terms of the GCSE itself, it might be literacy rates. So the average, for example, in Thurrock has one of, if not the lowest literacy rates in the country. It's generally associated with being a working class area. And it's more noticeable within those elements of Thurrock where it's maybe the poorer areas as well. So I'm sure if you looked at the postcodes of areas where it was maybe the lowest incomes compared to the highest areas, even within Thurrock, the reading age, there'd be a disparity. Okay, and that was from Teach First. So a disadvantaged child is 3 times more likely to be excluded from school. So they're more likely to potentially have issues going on at home or in the school, and more likely to maybe resort to things like misbehaving and whatnot. Only 7% of young people are educated privately in the UK, but make up 55% of students at Russell Group universities. So Russell Group universities are like the top 25, 30 odd universities in the UK. So you can see there again, it's massive disproportion in terms of way more privately educated kids, and should be potentially, statistically speaking, going to these top universities. And then 33% of pupils who receive free school meals achieve 5 or more A-star to C grades at GCSE, compared with 61% of those not receiving free school meals. So what is making a point there that free school meals is an indicator sometimes of perhaps being from a lower income background, and they're saying that nearly half or 30 odd percent of kids, or rather speaking, you are more likely to get A to C grades, 5 or more A to C grades, if you are not receiving free school meals. So if you are not in need necessarily economically. We've got loads of points there. I'd maybe take 1 or 2, just whatever ones make the most sense for you. Okay, so what is the Marxist view of education? So for task 1, I just want you to write down how the education system is an example of a capitalist superstructure. If you don't know what a capitalist superstructure is, go back, look in Unit 1. You'll see under the Marxist lesson, you'll get an idea of what it means to be a capitalist superstructure. And you can see this image here. That kind of is a good illustration of that. So the education system is an example of a capitalist superstructure. The education system keeps working class people in their place whilst maintaining capitalism and the wealth of the ruling class. So it's this idea that the kids who can afford the best education, that already have the money, and because they're getting the best education, they're getting the best quality of grades. Best quality of grades are leading to the best jobs. Best jobs lead to the best pay. And then the pay affords them, when they have children, to go and put their children in private education. And it's this cycle, this constant cycle of encouraging this rich-poor divide. Right, so there are sort of four ideas that Marxists in general talk about when it comes to the role of the education system. So we're going to go over those, and then we're just going to look at the examples as well. In fact, I'll just put them on there. Feel free to pause the video. I'm just going to talk through them, read them out, explain them, but feel free, if you want to yourself, just to pause the video and then write a few of those down. So the first function, it serves the interest of the ruling class, so the wealthy. So by passing on ideas and beliefs that benefit the ruling class, such as meritocracy, the education system serves the ruling class interest. So what that means is ideas like meritocracy: if you work hard, if you're talented, then you'll be rewarded. If you are rich and you go to a better school, it may be that your grades are better because you've gone to that better school. Not necessarily that you're more hardworking or more talented than someone from a poorer background, but it gives this illusion, because that ultimately you're getting better grades, you are getting the better qualifications, you're getting the better jobs. So to give an example, if I do well in school, it must be down to my own hard work and IQ, nothing at all to do with my resources or background. So that's the point the Marxists are saying. They're saying this is that example is an overly simplified example. That is maybe what some people who are ruling class or more wealthy believe to legitimize their position, to say, look, I deserve where I am. Okay, so for the second one, reproduces the class structure. So education appears to reward students fairly based on their individual abilities. However, it actually favors pupils from more privileged backgrounds. Over time, education reproduces the advantages that social class groups have over each other or one another. So classic example of that, if I go to a private school with a better quality education, I'm more likely to get a better grade, therefore making it more likely for me to get a better job and better income. So it's just this idea that the better facilities are reproducing this rich-poor divide. Okay, the third one, it breeds competition. So there's nothing wrong with competition, but you have to think in terms of a capitalist system where everything is about greed is encouraged and things, and competition is seen as good. So through exams and sports at school, students are encouraged to accept values such as competition. This helps maintain capitalism, which is based on competition. So it's this idea, greed is good. Why help others out? It is survival of the fittest. I will celebrate getting into my university, even if it's at the expense of my friends. Now, it's not talking about getting your friends kicked off of a GCSE or an exam or anything like that, or pulling any moves like that. But it's putting yourself first, and it's this idea, the idea there that that's fine, and that it's essentially anti-collectivism. This idea that it's all about you. And then finally, secondary socialization. So working class students learn norms and values at school that prepare them for their lower position in society later on. So, for example, they learn to accept hierarchy at school and to obey rules. So I will blindly follow the instructions of my teacher and superiors, just like I will from my boss in future. So sometimes in school you don't agree with the teacher, but you're told you have to bite your tongue, just get on with it. It's the same at work, and in fact some of those things may be unethical or in a capitalist system seen as immoral, but you've got to answer and not challenge your boss or those in the hierarchy of capitalism. So these are the four ideas. I'm just gonna mute myself just for 10 seconds, just so you can pause the video, just write any of those down if you need to, and then we'll move on to the next bit. But these are the generic ideas. We're going to come on to two theorists next who talk about some specific ideas you need to remember. Right. So this is the main, well, these are the two main theories you need to remember. They talk about two ideas that we're going to go over. That's the correspondence principle and the illusion of meritocracy. So just like in the functionalist stuff, you need to remember one political and one economic function. You need to remember these two ideas. It's great if you can remember what's on the screen now, but they're the generic stuff. It's mainly the ideas of Bowles and Gintis you need to remember. So, correspondence principle. So in essence, it means that the school's hidden curriculum, so if we remember the hidden curriculum, those values we're learning, operate to benefit the economy. So you could just pick an example here of how the hidden curriculum operates to benefit the economy. So students, as we talked about earlier, students learn to obey rules and not to question hierarchy, so school rules. Students have limited choice over what they learn. So e.g. most schools only offer 5 to 10 GCs as options. In state schools. You might have more options and therefore more resources and more variety and ability and skill sets that others don't have in state schools, but they're available in private. So for example, learning Latin, you're not going to learn that in a state school necessarily. That's potentially an advantage. Students learn to deal with mundane tasks. So not every student finds sociology classes or other classes the most riveting, but it's called work for a reason. It's part of the package, as it were. And that's almost preparing you for work life where there'll be things you don't want to do. So putting in the hours, even though you don't want to, rather be doing something else. And then we've got the idea the curriculum is fragmented into little packets of knowledge. It's not really teaching you the full picture of the profession. So you might learn how to fix a car on a mechanics course, but it's not really telling you how to be a CEO of a car company. And then finally, students are motivated by results, not the love of course. So I think that's really true in the education system. It's a bit of an exam factory in terms of just trying to get you those top grades instead of really spending lots and lots of time having opportunities to debate things and to discuss ideas and understand it wider. It's more concentrating on what do I need to do to get that top grade. So again, all of these things benefit the economy, and just like with grades, how it becomes an exam factory, is exactly the same with profits or stats or scores or whatever it may be in your profession. Is preparing you for that. So remember, you need to know what the correspondence principle is, and then use one of these examples. Right, and then the other idea is just this idea that meritocracy is failing. So it's a very generic idea. It's this idea that regardless of your IQ and your work ethic, so you may be really intelligent, really hardworking, your economic background, that includes the resource at your disposal, will always influence what job you end up in, statistically speaking, that is. So I've just got an example here of you can see in the chart the type of schools. And you can see that comprehensive schools don't do necessarily as well as independent schools, and that's largely to do not with the students and their intelligence or work ethic, but more to do with the resources at their disposal, their economic background, as it were. Okay, and then finally, like I say, you need to have preferably one strength, one weakness for the Marxist approach just in your back pocket there. So There's a study from Wilson and Pickett, the spirit level, which is evidence that suggests a failure of meritocracy. This idea there is this link between state schools and lower income jobs. Okay, so it's just making that point that private schools statistically do better. And the Office of National Statistics, the ONS, areas with lower literacy rates experience higher levels of relative deprivation when compared to areas with better literacy rates. So relative deprivation is a type of poverty. So you just make the point there. A bit what I was saying about Thurrock earlier, and even within Thurrock. Okay, and then some of the weaknesses. So Willis, even though himself is sort of seen to flirt with the idea of Marxist theory and interactionism, he argues that there is class inequality in education, but many rebel against authority whilst at school instead of being passive. So that hidden curriculum, the correspondence principle, is Willis is kind of challenging that and saying, look, well, not all working class kids are passive. Some of them challenge. It can also be seen as deterministic, which means they assume everyone is passive. They assume everything is in this hierarchy of capitalism. And it doesn't consider other inequalities like race or gender inequalities in the education system. That was your final task. Just make sure you've got one strength and one weakness down for that. And that concludes the video.